Imagine a young man growing up in a home where everything revolved around the temple, worship and the law. That was Ezekiel, son of a priest, grandson of a priest, born to serve in the temple of Jerusalem. He probably learned to speak by listening to the psalms and prayers of the elders, but even before he donned the priestly robe, his life was turned upside down. The Babylonian Empire came, crushing Judah like soft clay. Nebuchadnezzar took the best, the wisest, the nobles. And in the middle of the caravan of exiles was Ezekiel, about 25 years old, without a temple, without a nation, without a clear future. Babylon was not a concentration camp, but it was not home either. It was another land, another language, other gods. Everything seemed out of place. Subscribe to the channel for more exciting Bible stories and turn on notifications so you don't miss any videos. If this content touches your heart and you want to support us, feel free to click on the Thanks a Lot button. All help is welcome and makes a big difference. And then comes the strangest detail. In exile, far from the altar, that was where God chose to speak to him, and not in a subtle way. It was the 5th year of captivity. He was sitting on the banks of the Chebar River, perhaps trying to understand what had gone wrong. And suddenly, the sky split open. A bright cloud, lightning flashing through the air, a wheel of fire spinning inside another wheel, eyes everywhere. It was no ordinary sight. It was as if heaven itself had descended to call Ezekiel. The glory of God, which had previously been in the Holy of Holies, now appeared there, in the middle of Babylon, as if to say, I am not bound to the temple. I go where my people are. And Ezekiel, who until then had been just another exile, found himself face down on the ground, hearing a voice that would change everything. Son of man, stand up. But this voice did not come with just beautiful words. It came with a mission, and it came with a warning. They will not listen to you, but even so, you will speak. Because what God would show him in the coming days was beyond what any man could bear. Ezekiel was still there, on the ground, trying to understand what he had just seen when the presence of God lifted him up as if he were wind inside his bones. He did not get up on his own. He was pulled up by an invisible force, and there, before him, the vision remained alive. Creatures that seemed to have come out of a strange dream. 4 beings, each with 4 faces, human, lion, ox, and eagle. They had wings, feet like those of a calf, and shone like burning bronze. Beside them were gigantic wheels, full of eyes, spinning in all directions without ever losing their way. It was as if the universe itself were moving there before him. There was the sound of wings flapping like the roar of many waters. It was the sound of majesty, of something the world could not contain. Ezekiel was not dreaming, it was real, and high above it all, a throne. And on the throne, a figure resembling a man, surrounded by fire and splendor, the glory of God. But it wasn't just to impress. God doesn't appear just to be seen, he appears to transform. And Ezekiel was being called urgently. It was as if heaven was saying, there is no more time. The voice spoke again, loud, direct. God called him Son of Man, a firm way of reminding him who was in charge and who obeyed. And he gave him a difficult mission. Go speak to a stubborn, rebellious people who have closed their hearts. They will not want to listen, but you will tell them anyway, because they will know that a prophet was among them. But before opening his mouth to speak to the people, Ezekiel would have to prove something that no ordinary man would eat. And that was what came next. God stretched out his hand, and in it was a scroll. But it wasn't just any scroll. It was full of heavy words written on both sides as if they couldn't all fit in one meaning. Lamentations, groans, disasters foretold, all there, recorded as a sentence. And then came the order, eat this scroll. It wasn't a figure of speech. Ezekiel had to eat it, literally. as if the word of God needed to enter through his mouth before it could leave through his soul. He opened his mouth and chewed every piece of that strange scroll, and oddly enough, it tasted sweet, pure honey, but that sweetness hid a weight. It was no ordinary food. It was a call that tore deep into his soul. With that scroll inside him, Ezekiel was no longer just a spectator. He now carried a message that no one wanted to hear. God spoke again, firmly, almost as if preparing someone for battle. Do not go to a people with a strange language. Go to your people, to those in your house. But they are stubborn and have closed hearts. And God did something else. He hardened Ezekiel. He made his face like stone and his forehead like diamond. Because prophesying to a rebellious people requires more than courage. It requires the steadfastness of someone who knows they will be ignored, rejected, perhaps even hated, and yet they continue. God said, "Do not be afraid. Do not be dismayed." But Ezekiel knew it would not be easy. Resistance would come not only from harsh words, but from gestures, looks, contempt. And then the hand of the Lord took him by the hand. It was as if something was pushing him from the inside out, raising dust wherever he went. And he was taken away, in a way that could not be refused. And in the middle of the journey, God made him experience silence, a kind of silence that spoke louder than any cry. When he returned to where the exiles were, a despondent people living near the Chebar River, Ezekiel said nothing. Nothing. He sat among them for 7 whole days, silent, just watching. It was as if the scroll was still being digested inside him, burning slowly. Ezekiel carried a fire that he could not yet release. And when God finally spoke again, it was not with poetry, it was with weight. "I have made you a watchman." It was like a watchman in a tower, someone who sees danger from afar and cries out to the people. But if the watchman remains silent, the blood is on him. That was it. Ezekiel now had a burden. If he didn't warn them, he would be guilty. If he spoke and no one listened, so be it. He would have done his part. But then God did something unexpected. He locked his mouth, not with a padlock or a spell, but with power. Ezekiel was mute, unable to speak of his own accord. He would only speak when God commanded him to. And so began a series of strange, bizarre, almost theatrical actions, but ones that were loaded with meaning. The first, a brick. Yes, a clay brick. Ezekiel drew the city of Jerusalem on it, as if drawing a war map. Then he placed miniature weapons, ramps, battering rams around it. A siege. And he stayed there, lying on his side, 390 days facing one way, then 40 more facing the other. Each day represented a year of sin of the people. And meanwhile, he ate measured bread and drank rationed water like a prisoner before the fall of the city. And as if that weren't strange enough, God asked for more. "Shave your head, run a razor over your beard," something forbidden for priests. Ezekiel obeyed. Then he took the strands of hair and divided them. One part he burned, another he cut with a sword, and the last he scattered in the wind. Each strand, a destiny. Each piece, a sign of what was to come. But the people still did not understand. They still thought it was an exaggeration, until God decided to show them what no one wanted to see, what was happening inside the temple. One morning, Ezekiel had another vision, but this time it was not of flaming wheels or heavenly thrones. It was something more intimate and more shameful. God stretched out something like a hand of fire and grabbed Ezekiel by the hair, and before he could react, he was pulled up, carried in spirit to Jerusalem. Not the Jerusalem he remembered, with praise and incense, but a hidden version concealed behind the doors of the temple. He was placed at the entrance to the inner court, right where the glory of God used to be. And there on the walls were drawings of disgusting creatures, idols of all kinds, snakes, monsters, all carved into the temple of the Lord. To make matters worse, important men, elders of the house of Israel, stood before these images, incense in their hands, saying to themselves, "The Lord does not see us." It was like opening a closet and finding that inside the clean clothes, there was only mold. A spiritual rot that no one could see from the outside, but that God could see in every corner. Ezekiel was led from room to room, as if in a nightmare that only got worse. He saw women weeping for Tammuz, a pagan god of fertility. He saw men prostrate, with their backs to the temple, worshipping the sun in the east. Each scene was a stab in the prophet's heart, and God asked, almost ironically, "Have you seen this, Son of Man? Do you think this is little? I will show you worse abominations." As if each step revealed another step in the decline. The house of God had been taken over by pagan rituals, and those leading it were not foreigners. They were the very leaders of the people. Ezekiel already knew that judgment was inevitable, but he had yet to see what was perhaps the most painful scene of all, the moment when the glory of God, the glory he had seen there at the beginning, would begin to fade away. Ezekiel stood there, staring wide-eyed, when he noticed something that sent a chill down his spine. The glory of God was moving. That same glory he had seen at the beginning, surrounded by cherubim, shining like fire and full of majesty. It began to move, but not to come closer. On the contrary, it was leaving. First, the glory went to the entrance of the temple. It stopped there, as if taking one last look before leaving for good. It seemed like a silent, heavy farewell, as if God was saying, "You don't want me here, so I'm leaving." The cherubim lined up, the wheels turned, and the sound of wings spread like thunder in the sky. The glory moved further away, to the threshold of the eastern door. Ezekiel did not say a word. He was seeing something that no other priest had ever seen. God leaving what should have been the holiest place on earth, the Holy of Holies, empty. It was like watching someone turn off the lights in their house and lock the door from the outside. Only this house was Jerusalem. As the glory departed, God showed the prophet the leaders conspiring, saying, "This city is like a pot, and we are the meat inside it," as if they were safe in the midst of chaos, arrogance mixed with blindness. They thought that because they were in Jerusalem, nothing could touch them. But the pot was about to boil, and it would burn from the inside. And God spoke to Ezekiel again, with sadness and firmness mixed together. "Even if Moses and Samuel were here, I would not spare these people." There was no turning back. The sin was too deep, and the presence of God was already crossing the gates. And it was there, in that desolate setting, that Ezekiel received the news that would change everything. A confirmation, not a vision, but a fact. Time passed. Days, months, maybe years. Ezekiel continued to prophesy in silence, speaking only when God told him to. Life among the exiles went on, dry, repetitive, full of suspicious glances. Many people still believed that Jerusalem was untouchable, that the city would never fall. "It is the throne of God," they said. And Ezekiel, he just watched. He waited, until on a muggy afternoon someone came running out of the desert. His clothes were torn, his face was covered in dust, and his feet were wounded. A messenger. He was breathing heavily, his eyes were lost. He came before Ezekiel and said bluntly, "The city has fallen." At that moment, something happened inside the prophet. His voice broke free. It was as if a knot that had been tied around his throat had suddenly been cut. His mouth opened, the silence ended. The prophecy had been fulfilled. Everything he had seen, said, and experienced in visions was now real. The temple, in ruins, the walls, on the ground, the people, scattered, dead, enslaved. It was no longer possible to deny it. Ezekiel was not exaggerating. He was not crazy. He was a messenger, and now the people saw that the truth had come knocking at their door, too late to stop it, early enough to hurt. But God did not end there. Now that the punishment had been fulfilled, he began to reveal something different. The tone changed. Amidst the ashes, words of reconstruction emerged. Images of fields in bloom, of cities rebuilt, of a people returning home. And in the midst of these visions, one in particular stood out. Ezekiel was taken to a strange place, a vast desert valley where the ground was covered with bones, dry, scattered, ancient bones. There was no sign of life, only silence. And then God asked an unexpected question which echoed like thunder in the prophet's soul. "Son of man, can these bones live?" Ezekiel looked around. A huge, empty valley covered with bones, not complete skeletons, but scattered, dry, brittle bones. They seemed to have been forgotten by time, and God asked, "Can these bones live?" The prophet didn't know what to say. He didn't want to take any chances. He answered carefully, "Lord, you know," because only God could bring life out of death. Then came the command, "Prophesy over these bones. Say to them, 'Dry bones, hear the word of the Lord.'" Ezekiel took a deep breath and spoke. As soon as the words left his mouth, the entire valley began to vibrate. A strange noise, like the crackling of dry wood, echoed everywhere. The bones began to move, one fitting into the other, femur with hip, rib with spine, arm with shoulder. It was a spectacle of new beginnings, but it was still just a structure. God told him to prophesy again, "Call the breath of the four winds, blow on these dead, so that they may live." And when Ezekiel obeyed, the wind came, invisible but powerful. It entered the bodies, their chests inflated, their eyes opened, and that valley of bones became an army standing, alive, firm, ready. God then explained what it meant. Those bones were the house of Israel, a people who said, "Our bones are dried up, our hope is dead, we are cut off." But God was saying the opposite. "I will open your graves. I will bring you back to the land. I will breathe new life into you." It wasn't just about going home. It was about resurrecting faith. Ezekiel saw that the history of the people did not end in destruction. There was something more, something that was coming, someone, in fact, because amid the promises, God began to speak of a shepherd. Not just any shepherd, one who would come from the line of David, a different kind of king, one who would gather the entire flock and care for it with justice. After the valley of bones, God began to paint a new picture before Ezekiel. But now, it wasn't just about resurrecting what was dead, it was about guiding, protecting, gathering. And the words God used smelled like an ancient promise. He spoke of a shepherd, one, a righteous king coming from the line of David. But the curious detail is that David had been dead for centuries. So who was God talking about? This, my servant David, he mentioned, was more than a human king. He was a symbol of someone who would come at the right time to unite a broken people, scattered and divided into pieces. "They will no longer be two nations," God said, "nor will they be divided into two kingdoms." He was talking about Judah and Israel, brothers who had become rivals, but who would one day become one flock again, with one shepherd. And this shepherd would not rule with a sword or force. He would rule with justice. God promised, "I will make a covenant of peace with them, an everlasting covenant." Nothing temporary, nothing fragile, something lasting, firm, unbreakable. And then, as if all that weren't enough, God spoke about the place where these people would live. He said he would make his sanctuary dwell among them forever. He would put his spirit in them. He would live there, among the people, as never before. It was as if heaven and earth were coming together at last. What Ezekiel was hearing was not just a promise to return home. It was a vision of something much greater, something that no exile could prevent, something that no empire could erase. But for that to happen, something still needed to be shown, something big, enormous, carefully measured. And so Ezekiel was taken once again in a vision. Now before him stood a gigantic structure, a new temple, a temple like no man had ever seen before. Ezekiel was taken to a high mountain, and there before his eyes a gigantic structure appeared, a temple. But it was not a ruin being rebuilt. It was something new, detailed, perfect. A man appeared with a measuring rope in one hand and a ruler in the other, and everything began to be measured: gates, walls, rooms, corridors. Each space had an exact size, as if it had been drawn directly in the sky before touching the ground. Ezekiel walked inside the vision, amazed. It was like walking in a place where every stone spoke of order, purity, and new beginnings. He saw restored altars, purified priests, doors facing east, as if everything was ready to welcome someone very special. And then she returned. The glory of the Lord, the same glory that had departed, that Ezekiel had seen receding, now returned. It came from the east, like the sun rising again, filling the temple with light and power. The prophet fell face down on the ground. He couldn't resist. What had been lost was now present again. But it didn't stop there. God began to show a fountain, a trickle of water flowing from the temple itself. At first it seemed small, timid, but as it flowed, it grew. It turned into a stream, then a river so deep that no one could cross it. And wherever this river flowed, everything lived. Trees sprouted on the banks, leaves with healing powers, fish in abundance, life where before there was only salt and death. It was a vision full of symbols, but clear as clean water. God didn't just want to rebuild walls. He wanted to restore hearts, to dwell among the people, to heal from the inside out, to renew the land, the soul, the hope. Ezekiel's journey was not made of applause or visible achievements. He did not lead crowds, rebuild cities, or see the people turn back to God en masse. But he obeyed. He spoke when he was supposed to speak and was silent when God told him to be silent. He bore the weight of visions that would have crushed anyone. He carried in his body and soul the warning of a judgment that was coming, and then the relief of a promise that no one could take away. Ezekiel teaches us that being faithful does not always mean being understood, that often those who see the furthest are those who walk the loneliest path. But he also shows us that God never truly abandons us, not in exile, not in silence, not in loss. Even when it seems that everything has collapsed, glory can return. Even when everything seems as dry as scattered bones, the breath of God can bring life again. Through him, we learn that God is not limited to buildings, rituals, or traditions. He goes where the broken heart is. He speaks in a strange land, in the midst of dust far from any altar. And when he decides to restore, he does not just rebuild on the outside. He starts from the inside, with a new spirit, a new heart, a new hope. Ezekiel saw the end, but he also saw the beginning. He announced the fall of the temple, but he was the first to see an eternal temple. He spoke of the death of the people, but he was the one who had the privilege of seeing the bones rise. In the end, his life became a bridge between what was lost and what was still possible, between deserved punishment and unexpected grace. And the question remains, if God called Ezekiel in the midst of exile, chaos, and pain, what might he be trying to tell us now? Have we been listening, or have we just closed our eyes and turned our faces away? If you liked Ezekiel's story and want to continue following other stories of faith and overcoming adversity, be sure to like this video and share it with your loved ones. And of course, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new content. Together, we will explore more powerful lessons from the Bible.